Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight. This is the second season of Fact Up, and this is our first live. So, 1 live recording and 2 live in person. My name is Leighton Jones. I am the communications coordinator for Our City Buffalo and Our City Action Buffalo. I'll be your main host for tonight's panel on displacement. And as you can see with the beautiful faces on this stage with me, these are my panelists for displacement. I won't have them introduce themselves just yet, but we'll get into that shortly. We'll be talking about what displacement looks like for people who have been displaced, and displacement looks different. Displacement takes different ways and different tolls on people, and we'll be discussing that.
So let's get into it. What do we mean when we talk about displacement? Traditionally, people think of displacement as evictions or having to move from one place or another, or something called rent burden. That's when you pay over 30% of your income for housing. The New York Times reported earlier this week that Buffalo is the most affordable place for people living on minimum wage to live. I don't think that they've been to my neighborhood and talked to real people about their experiences. That's what we hope to do tonight.
Talk about it.
And we also want to add that displacement comes from various forms, from refugees, fleeing conflict, the LGBTQ plus WXYZ element of P community, and people having to leave their home state because of their restrictions that limit their access to affordable housing. We also experience plant closures and the need to find new economic opportunities, infrastructure projects like the US 33, and so on.
So, displacement often disrupts lives. It's what happens to all of us when the power elite get an idea. What profits, they may change our lives in irreparable ways, right? The report that will be discussed on this panel, or on the second panel, sorry, it outlines who these people are and what power they hold. Because sometimes we need to know the players in the game to actually play the game, right? Yeah. So that information can help us when figuring out how to effectively run campaigns, to win material benefits for our people, and to stand up and fight back in this moment.
First, we need to consider how elite classes often benefit from displacement. For instance, when neighborhoods gentrify, wealthier individuals move in, often pushing out the long-standing residents. And if it's not about moving in, it's about changing the fabric of communities, schools, businesses, cultural landmarks can all shift dramatically, often disregarding the needs of those who are displaced. That's the reason why OCAB hosts the Anti-Displacement Summit. It allows us all as Buffalonians and residents to get educated on the issues that start to take action. Let's meet the rest of these folks on this wonderful panel in the room and kick off the show. Leighton, I'm gonna pass it to you.
Thanks to everyone for being on the stage. I know you all individually, and I know that you do important work in the community or have done important work and continue to do because you're on the stage tonight. So I want to thank you for being here. Thank you for using your voice in this capacity. And thank you for being aware enough to want to educate your community, right? Sometimes it's hard for us as individuals to take up space in these capacities and to be upfront and bold with our words. And so when we can articulate ourselves in different ways to engage the public in what they need to know, then it's deserving of some applause. So thank you. I'll have you introduce yourself, and truly, what motivated you to come today?
Well, thank you, Leighton. My name is Garnell Whitfield, former fire commissioner for the city of Buffalo. My mother was the eldest victim in the Tops massacre. And since then, I've become an activist of sorts, traveling the country, fighting for social justice issues, sensible gun legislation, and those kinds of things. Obviously, displacement is a part of that fight when we talk about social justice issues, so that's what brings me here tonight.
Okay, well, let's welcome Mr. Garnell into the room, everybody. Thank you. And again, sorry for your loss. Yes. Ijaz, I'll pass it to you.
Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Ijaz Jasil. I am Urban Affairs reporter at Investigative Post. It is a local nonprofit newsroom dedicated solely to investigative journalism. And I'm here today because displacement is something that I run into a lot of with the work that I do. My coverage is primarily on housing, and I've learned the ways in which displacement can look different from not just the landlord-tenant side of things, but from housing things. I take weekly visits to housing court, and just a quick anecdote from what I saw this morning, actually. There was an attorney who asked the judge to take him off the case because his clients, who live in Spain, have not spoken to him in 3 years, but they own properties here in Buffalo that are getting further into a state of deterioration. These are places where people can be living, and I see it all the time. There are so many people who come in the city that we call investors, but they're not really investing in our community. And so, you're a renter, you're living in a place, unbeknownst to you, it has all of these issues, it gets condemned, and by law, the judge can't let you live there. That is a form of displacement. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to go, and a lot of people do not have the money, do not have the resources, or, the secondary housing. So I'm really glad that you all are opening the conversation for this and talking about the different forms of displacement, because there are so many, and it looks so many different ways.
Can we give it up for Ijaz real quick? Thank you. Thank you for the work you do at Investigative Post. I learn so much from you as an individual, and I aspire to be more like you in my day-to-day. Well, let's introduce our next panelist, Ms. Janaya.
Yes, I am Janaya Capers. I am the housing justice organizer at Push Buffalo, and I'm here today just to tell my story with displacement, and also others as just also working as a housing justice organizer. Growing up, I've been displaced, just also moving throughout houses. I've even moved like 15 times by the time I was 18. And then also just hearing stories of others and how, if you've seen Buffalo, just how bad like the housing climate is and how just severe our housing is, and how one of the things I'm working with is proactive renters inspection and trying to make sure our houses are safe and healthy. And people have to move because of that, because they don't have safe and healthy housing. That's something that I had to deal with when I was younger, moving because of having unhealthy and safe housing. So just trying to tell those stories, the reason why people have to constantly move out of their houses because they don't have safe and healthy housing to live to, or even to, when they have to move, they can't find even any houses to move into.
Well, shout out to you for the work you do for the residents that you represent. You represent them very well. And shout out to PRI, because Lord knows we do need safe housing to live in. At the bare minimum, safe. All right? Right next to me is this beautiful young lady that I feel like I have so much in common with. But I'll have you introduce yourself, Hagar.
Yeah, it's a pleasure knowing you, Leighton, and it's a pleasure being here. My name is Hagar Hafez. I am here on a non-professional capacity. Displacement is very close to my heart for many reasons, but I have been working with the immigrant community since I became an immigrant myself. In 2015. I worked mostly in service providing on multiple capacities with the immigrant community from different statuses. I have a status soup myself, different experiences at each stage, and currently I am a manager of organizing and strategy at the New York Immigration Coalition, where I'm fortunate enough to advocate and organize, mobilize for my community. But why I'm here on my unprofessional capacity and saying that displacement means so much to me is because I feel like displacement is general enough of a word that does describe all of what we talked about. But it also, if we really look back throughout history and how almost all of our communities have been displaced and how it plays in our societal structures now and our economic and political systems and all that I'm not going to bore you about. as traumatic as it is a concept, if explored, that could build so many bridges and solidarity between our communities, and understanding what moving out of your home does to you, what having to flee to seek safety, or seek community, seek a fresh start, a new start, and yeah, it looks like you said, displacement wears many faces.
Yeah, shout out to you, Hagar. Give Hagar a round of applause, please. When I introduced myself, I did not necessarily introduce what motivated me to speak on displacement today, right? And I think I left mine for last because I like to open and have space for everyone else to share. And so for me, displacement has taken a personal toll in my life, where I had to move from my home country of birth to living in the US, right? If you don't know, I'm a migrant or an LGBTQ plus person from Jamaica, and it's illegal to be a part of that community in Jamaica. And so I was obviously displaced by force, not wanting to leave everything I knew and loved to come to something that's very new and fresh to me, right? And learning how to live on a daily basis in this new economy and government. And I know that with being a migrant, a lot of times, or an asylum seeker or a refugee, a lot of times it's not by choice that people just want to come to the US or go to a country that's safer for them. It's because they are displaced because they're unsafe. Thank you guys again for taking up space here. It means a lot to me as an individual to speak on displacement, knowing the many hats that displacement holds. Nonetheless, let's get into it, okay? We've kind of discussed what our personal stories look like in terms of displacement, but how does it relate to the broader Buffalo or the broader community in this city? How does it impact residents that you've had direct experiences with?
Well, I can start. I'll just say that I think the way displacement affects community, you would think it's something that would bring people closer together. But what I find is that a lot of times we point the fingers at each other instead of pointing the fingers at the systems that have been embedded, not in the city just only, but in this country that allows people to get displaced. A lot of times you see someone living on the street and you'll hear someone say, well, what did you do to get yourself in that situation? But you have no idea, people's circumstances, people's lives, the things that drove them to get to where they are. Just getting a little on the personal note about displacement, going a little more personal into mine. It is something I experienced. When I was 17, my family and I moved from a place that we were living in for almost 10 years. It was an apartment in the Kenfield projects. And it was never a safe environment, but it got to a point where our lives were threatened. So we had to, it was not a sort of let's save money and plan. It was a you got to go now sort of thing. So my mother, tried to see what was available in terms of shelters, and a lot of what was available only accepted women and children. So my older disabled brother would not be able to stay with us, and so my mother would not, have him separated. So it was either live out of the car or live in a motel, because we couldn't afford a hotel.
Right.
So, for 3 months, my mom, my brother, and me shared a tiny little motel room, took shifts about who was going to sleep in the bed. And, it beat living out of a car, but it was still hellish. And that's what I think a lot of people don't realize, that displacement isn't just, oh, you didn't pay your rent, or you were a bad tenant, you broke the lease agreement, whatever. A lot of times it can be literally trying to save your life.
Yeah.
It can be trying to provide safety for you and your family, whether it's safety because of the environment or because of, like I said, and like you mentioned, the home you live in. We have lead paint in so many of our homes that are permanently disabling children physically and mentally. And then you wonder why suspension rates are so high, and there are behavioral issues, and people in schools aren't looking at these things. But what it does to a community is, I really think it tears us apart. And that's when we need to step back and analyze, what can you do with the power that you do have to contribute to making a change? How can we support each other? How can we hold our government accountable and make them work for us?
Yes.
Because housing is a human right. It is not something that should be earned. It's not something that people should selectively get. It's something that we are all entitled to.
Yeah.
So community is where it's at, conversations where it's at.
And, and I also want to add, too, from what you're saying, displacement also rips families apart, communities, neighborhoods. Like, just imagine what it does when you constantly have people moving in and out a neighborhood, moving in and out communities. I know from like moving around a lot, like that does something to you, and it just makes you not want to connect with with people anymore. And it just makes you, and your neighbors too, like if you constantly have a neighbor moving in and out, because a lot of times people see a house like, oh, this house is messed up, so you're gonna have another neighbor moving in, another neighbor moving in. You're not gonna talk to that neighbor because you know that they're not only gonna be here for a couple of months. So then that just does something to a neighborhood. Then people are not connecting anymore. And then so that just lowers like the value of neighborhoods too, and the connections that people are going to meet. And that just, displacement not only messes up like individuals, but it also messes up families, also communities, connections. It's on so many different levels that people don't take into consideration.
I think, displacement comes in many forms, as has been said. If you go all the way back to what they call the Great Migration from the South, that was displacement. That was people running for their lives from Jim Crow, from lynchings and all those things. People were running for their lives, literally. And so oftentimes when you have these kinds of circumstances, such as yours and others, where you're being forced to leave, they call it something else. They label it something else, so they put it under another tab or whatever. Having to move all of these times because you are in an unsafe house or in a dangerous situation and you're forced to move. When I was still working with the city, one of the things that civil service used to do for firefighters who applied for the job is they would look at your history, your housing history, and people of color, poor people, move because they have to. They don't own the property, so they have to move, and they move trying to improve their life or trying to find a safe space. But they held that against you and called you unstable. And so these are some of the myths or whatever that surround displacement, that where they even use, you having to move against you many times.
Yeah, it tears communities apart.
Absolutely. I think once you zoom out globally or you zoom into a city like Buffalo, you see displacement trickle down, right? And, way before I came to the U.S., my family faced that back home, right, before we had to leave the country. And, I was a sick child because of it. It was for different reasons. But I think, like, being an immigrant myself and understanding my own story and understanding of displacement and then working for the entirety of my time here with the immigrant community, obviously, like, when you talk about immigrants, it's like immigrants, right? It's all these people who just come here from this country, from their countries, when, in fact, a lot of immigrants actually have to go to multiple countries before they end up here.
Yes.
Some of them have to live in camps. Actually, the average a refugee stays in a camp is 14 to 22 years. So many years where childhood education is paused, where you don't necessarily have access to clean water. Sometimes, you have issues like accessing medication, especially under COVID. You rely on those volunteers or different organizations to bring you those, and no access. And then they come to their final destination. If they're refugees, they didn't choose it. It kind of gets assigned to you. And that's your new home. If you are not a refugee, if you're an asylum seeker or an undocumented person, you get to present yourself and choose your home, but obviously other factors contribute to that, to your journey and what that might look like. And then if you really like focus in, and I think that's an important part of displacement too, is like discussing how it affects folks with nuances. So we're talking about real people, whether we're talking about immigrants or anybody in the community who's displaced, such as the example you gave about the homeless person. These people have lived through things. They currently do live through things. This thing could be domestic violence. It could be, illnesses. It could be that they're from a certain age group. Your experience as an immigrant or a displaced person when you're a child is super different from when you're an elderly person. What your needs are differ, and I can make that argument for anybody who lives in Buffalo or anywhere else. Those nuances matter, and they impact how you experience displacement a lot more.
Yeah, displacement is a heavy topic. It's one that's resounding with the community because so many go through it. And sometimes we are going through displacement and we don't even know that this is what displacement looks like. But again, it wears many hats. I wanted to ask, right, how can we, because it's one thing to talk about things, but what can we do about it? So how can we combat what displacement looks like? How do you think policy could change to better support our communities facing displacement, whether that looks like the immigrant community that I'm a part of or Hagar is a part of, whether that looks like homelessness, whether that looks like LGBTQ+, because people who are a part of the LGBTQ+ community sometimes face discrimination from their own families and their own homes, and then they get evicted from their own homes. So that's a form of displacement. And so, yeah. Let me hear some thoughts on that.
So from my experience, I think the biggest change in policy is really just us, we the people, holding the government accountable. And, you look and you see so many issues in Buffalo and you think, well, what is the city doing? And there's a lot more that the city could be doing, but it is federal, state, and county as well. Like going back to a story that I wrote in late 2022, throughout the summer of 22, Erie County had the highest number of eviction filings in the state, like higher than all the boroughs of New York City with populations of over 1 million. And so one interesting thing that I did, I talked to someone from Neighborhood Legal Services, and she said, there's this thing, a rent supplement called the Social Security Net. And someone who is on public assistance can have extra funding, emergency funding for rent or for shelter stay. Erie County has been able to apply for this funding since 2009, and they have not. So naturally, I asked the county, well, why? And they said two things, basically. One is that rents in Erie County have been historically affordable, and two, that 71% of the bill have to be footed by taxpayers. So I naturally sort of had this rebuttal, which I didn't say to the county or my story because, I'm a journalist. I have to be objective. So this is Ijaz, the person speaking right now, not Ijaz, the journalist. So as far as rents being affordable, we talked about this earlier. Of course, Buffalo rents are probably affordable to someone living in Manhattan. But when you have someone here in the city of Buffalo who's making $30,000 or less, who, when you look at the census data, shows most Buffalo renters, most are severely rent burdened. God forbid you have something with your health, your car breaks down something, you're spending money that you don't even have, so there goes your rent money. So affordable for who?
Thank you.
And the second part about, the taxpayers would have to foot the bill, I can't speak for anyone else, but I would have much rather over the past few years, my taxpayer dollars been spent on giving assistance to people who need it than building a new football stadium in Orchard Park. That's where my taxpayer money went, and I'm not proud of it, and I'm not happy about it.
Okay, right.
I think it's just really, once again, even if the only thing you can do is talk and speak up, and don't speak up if you're not going to follow through, though. That's the thing. A lot of times we mobilize, we get angry, we speak out, and then we drop the issue. And that is how people keep getting to do what they want to with our money and our lives.
Yeah.
So, you have to realize that you've got to take agency. We have to stay on top of these issues.
And that's one of the things I really appreciate that you pointed out, was that shout out to Push, Janaya, shout out to your organization for even being in this space, because you guys have defended what displacement looks like for so many Buffalonians and aided them and found ways to support them, right? And so maybe you could speak to a little bit of what that looks like in terms of, residents that have been evicted, you've used your voice and your capacity to speak for them and aid them. And so what has that looked like for you?
We try not to be the voice of the people. We try to give people the voice. And our big thing is trying to, we organize, right? We are organizers. We try to bring people up and like give them the power. So we like come together, right? And then so if we see like someone is like being evicted, or we see like say that if it is an apartment building or something, like if you're having a problem, right, then that means your neighbor is also having a problem too. So the first thing is maybe you should start talking. A lot of people don't talk with each other. And so like, okay, maybe you should, if you live in an apartment building, maybe you should talk to your neighbor, then door knock and door knock too. A lot of people sometimes feel like they're alone. And you're not alone. You're not the only person that's facing this problem. You're not the only one that's going through a rent problem. You're not the only person. And I think that that's where our main thing is too, is trying to talk to people and tell them that they are not alone. And then that's how we wind up finding people and getting people to build up their power and getting people out of these situations, right? That is the main way to organize, and that's what we've been doing for the last couple of years, I would say. So
Yeah, thank you. Again, shout out to Push, because Lord knows the work that you guys do are a little heavy burdening, right? Hagar?
I wanna encourage us to think a little bit about the reasons why people are displaced, the macro reasons, such as conflict and climate. And folks end up here, right? I'm gonna give some Buffalo examples that we've heard maybe in the past few years, especially in the immigrant community. So asylum seekers who are in hotels, the influx of immigrants, those folks were bused, from Texas to New York City and then to Buffalo. Mind you, they had no idea where they're going, where they're ending up. And we all seen the stories about where they ended up and what that meant for their families.
Just dropped off.
Another piece of it, let's think about family separations that we've seen happen across the U.S., that a lot of families are threatened and worried that they're going to happen again. So family separations will leave minors alone growing up, or, the breadwinner of the family will have to leave the country and whatnot. Detention, policing, all forms of displacement. All things that impact the entire community. Speaking of taxes, do we know that the collusion between police and ICE enforcement to funnel people into detention and deportation comes from our local taxes?
But Erie County can't apply for that money for. Okay, got it.
So that's something that, if you are going to the Anti-Displacement Summit and you do choose to join our workshop at some point, we're going to talk about a law that we are trying to push, and a local resolution for it that would stop police from colluding with ICE. All they really have to do is not share people's immigration information, which results in family separation, which results, I don't know if you guys know this, but the only holding center for immigration in the entire state is in Batavia. It's right there. And the fact that New York State is 100 miles radius from the border, specifically Buffalo, makes those ICE raids, makes those questionings, those collusions even more prevalent. This is more so like big picture, right? There are other pieces to this, right? So when we think of displacement and what else can we organize for, what else can we support, we can think about how we can keep people from being displaced, such as enforcement and policing, right? And when we talk about New York for All, the legislation we're going to discuss, we do work and collaborate with other initiatives that are kind of mimicking the same thing. But also if we think about language, right? So if you're in a new country, you were ripped from your home, or if you're a minor here alone and, family separation happened, you don't have a breadwinner, language access being, and I'm not talking about language justice, I'm saying access. So access to government offices, and mind you, immigrants, not only do they pay taxes, even undocumented immigrants just New York undocumented immigrants pay $3.1 billion in federal, local, state taxes, which would increase to $4 billion if we do give these people work authorizations. And how do we do that? Increase our legal services capacity, right? Sending more people to law school, which is more legislation that we're pushing for, to ask the state for money to be able to send folks to law school, train more accredited representatives, etc., to be able to represent more families. But I'll stop here. There are so many other more legislations. One that we are also working on is Working Families Tax Credit, which would cut New York State poverty by half. It's a tax credit that all New Yorkers would be able to be eligible for if they make under, I don't really know the threshold, but it's, I think, under 200,000. There's a calculator for it. Everybody would be eligible for it. Undocumented immigrants, immigrants with status, and every other New Yorker. So these are like some legislation that is out there that folks can get engaged in. I did some preview to our workshop.
Yeah, and a deep dive into what displacement, again, can look like, but what support can look like as well, right? Again, speaking from experience, from being a person that has been displaced, like even considering the physical environment and climate, like you said, moving from Jamaica was like a complete change. And I was living under the equator, or on the equator, right? Like completely different weather. So coming to Buffalo, and outside is outside. Right? Like, let's talk about that. Like, that's also like a major part. People don't necessarily want that, right? I didn't want to come into snow. I never really wanted to do that. Nonetheless, I'm here, and I'm excited, I'm happy, and I'm a part of a community that I really appreciate. This is a heavy topic to discuss, and so we've discussed what displacement looks like, what support can be done for displacement, and I just want you to say any last words of what displacement can do to our sense of community, and if you have anything else to share about what displacement looks like in the city of Buffalo.
I think we have to come together as people, as human beings, and leverage these efforts one with the other. I think there's a commonality that we have one with the other. The story that you told is the same story of blacks being enslaved, and the same things have happened. So this is not a new story. And I think when we learn our history, when we understand that this is a reoccurring issue within this country, within this world, we find ways to see each other and to work together. So I think that I would suggest more than anything that we take the time to talk, to share one with the other, to share these stories, and in those stories we see ourselves. And so you don't have to fight, alone. We hear immigrants, they divide and conquer.
Yes.
So that's what they do. They put us in pockets, they put us in different categories, so we see each other as the issue. But that's not the case. We have more in common than that, and I think we got to find that space.
Love. Well, I mean, just to rally back on that point, one thing that I've hated is when we get put into boxes, because in Jamaica, when we're signing documents, we don't have to say our race, we don't have to do so many of that demographic information, right? But one thing that I appreciated when I lived in Jamaica was that they always said we are the global majority. And that is true, right? And they want us to feel, they put us in these different boxes and say minority to make us feel like we are a smaller group, right? But baby, black people are the global majority. Amen. So let's take up the spaces that we're supposed to take up. Hey, Jazz.
Yes, and just to build off of what Garnell said, displacement more often than not is very inequitable. When you look at most of the people who are displaced, you see a pattern of color, of socioeconomic status. It is classist, it is racist, it is sexist. More single mothers are proportionately, displaced, and you can even look by zip code in the city. Like you said about putting things and people into boxes, Buffalo is a city where that is especially done. And it's because of our history of segregation, redlining, things that still impact the city today. That's what drove the monster here who took away your mother and other people. You should not be able to look at a map anywhere and see where most of the black people live.
Exactly.
There
Yep.
should be diversity. You should not look at a map and see where all of the poor people live and then see a pattern. Oh, they're all black and brown people, or they're all from immigrant communities. We really need to, as you said, band together, because divide and conquer is a very real thing, especially among the people in power. And we have more power than them. It is true. We may not have more money, but we have more power. So it is about mobilizing. It's about taking action. And it's about investment, too. For those who do have wealth in the city, we need to start buying these properties. When you see where most of the evictions are coming from, it's from LLCs and people who don't even live in the city. Like I said, people who don't even live in the country. People in France, people in Spain, people in Canada. So we have to do better by ourselves and look out for ourselves and realize that we collectively are a community.
Yes. Janaya?
Yes, I'm gonna just keep on building.
I love that.
No, like, I completely agree. Like, one thing that we got to, one thing I want to say is just like, yeah, displacement has like a lot of like historical like components, like we've been saying, and that like when it comes specifically when it comes to Buffalo, like within like the redlining and segregation that happens, like you can see like within the houses, like that's the reason why so many of our houses have like some of the like it's so bad, right? A lot of them is like broken down and have all of the problems, and some people don't even realize like that is equated to the red line, and a lot of it is in particular zip codes. And a lot of people don't associate that with each other, right? Mm-hmm. And that is the problem. Like, so why is only a certain people of like certain different graphics are in these houses and have these problems, right? And we need to acknowledge that this is the problem. So then when we get asked like, okay, what is the policies that we need put in place? Well, yes, I can say like, yes, we need to put like PRI in place because it's going to help fix the houses, but are they actually going to implement it? Because as we saw, it's not gonna happen. So we need to start holding them accountable. And then we need to actually like put more funding into this neighborhood, because we know that this neighborhood is more has been systemically, right, oppressed. So it's just like so much like other like historical components that's been going on, and then we need to also like address that. Mm-hmm. And I think that that is the real issue, and I think that once we figure that out and address that, then we can also get more into why people are actually being displaced and why we have all of these issues really going on, because all of it really has more deep-rooted meaning.
Yeah, learn from our history and build. Hagar?
I feel like it's such a beautiful, like, full circle moment in a way, because when we first started, you know, we were talking about the different phases of displacement, and, you know, we never, like, we met, but we never met. And I think, you know, the resemblance in the stories, but I do want to build off of what you said. I definitely agree that we are working all towards, you know, systemic issues that you talked about earlier that were made to divide us and have us working in silos and everything. But also within the immigrant community, the racial disparity about like who gets policed, they're black and brown people. In my previous jobs working as like a case manager or service provider to immigrants, I've seen illegal lockouts happen specifically to African immigrants. I've seen landlords say straight to my face, we're not housing them, they're African. These racial disparities exist, and they're in our community. And like you said, the historical significance can be studied in Buffalo. It could be studied globally about all of our communities being displaced. And somehow we found each other in this, you know, city. And really, like, what everybody wants as a Buffalo resident, as a person of color, as a person of culture, is to be able to live with their loved ones send their children to school and like just be able to afford housing, food, and basic human rights. And I think definitely organizing together, showing up for each other, and like our communities have been under attack more than ever, have been scapegoated more than ever, and have been blamed for everything. And so it doesn't help when we blame each other on top of that, and it trickles down. It always does, even within the immigrant community, in between people. And so, yeah, absolutely. I know it sounds so cheesy and everything, like, let's come together, no, but seriously, solidarity is powerful.
Yes. This is what community looks like, everyone. Thank you to each and every panelist up here. I appreciate your time. I'm sure the community appreciates your time, and everyone in this room appreciates your voices and what you had to say. Give it up for them, everyone. Some powerful points have been made, so thank you again. We're running into a quick break.